Hey guys, what's up? AG Sports. Just coming at you with a key number update today, and that might be a little bit different from what you usually see, especially if you're watching a lot of gambling and touts and stuff like that on YouTube. You get a lot of, like blah, 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 this team is good because the stats say this and my book said that and blah, 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 and that's, okay, cool. Those point us in the right direction. But at the end of the day, we need to know what numbers we are betting on, what numbers are important, what numbers do we need to care about, really. One of the numbers that I just saw move literally right before I hit the record button was this 8. So it went from minus 7.5 at minus 108 to really quickly minus 7.5 and some juice, and then minus 8 at 108. I mean, that all happened within like 5 minutes. So there was either a big bet or several big bets that impacted this line here, because Bookmaker, at least as far as I've known them, has never copied lines off somebody. They usually kind of set their own, and they'll stick to it until somebody moves them off of it. So if you're looking for that 7.5 tonight on the Panthers, or if you're maybe buying it down to the 7, the option's kind of gone for right now. It's possible we see some Texans money coming in later, but I doubt it. If you really wanted to still touch this game tonight, like I said, the only way I'd really be interested is if I was teasing down the 8 to 2, and then you get the 43 up to 49. So you might have missed the boat on that one unless you want to tease it. But like I said, let's get into some key numbers here. So first of all, how has the season played out through 2 weeks? What numbers have been key numbers and which ones have not been, surprisingly? So 1-point games, we have had 4 1-point games throughout these 2 weeks. We have also had 5 3-point games within these 2 weeks. A total, that means 29% of the games that have been played have fallen between 1 and 3 points as far as the deciding, point factor. I'm sorry, that's 29 either 1 or 3. But then if you add the 3%, which was one game that ended at 2 points, that gets you to 32%. Meaning that if you were taking dogs and you were taking dogs at a +3, there is a 32% chance that you at least push. If you got to 3.5, there's a 32% chance that you won on those games. So that might not sound like a whole lot, because obviously it's below the 52%. But to know that throughout this short sample size here, we're seeing these numbers pop up so frequently should give you a little bit more of a floor, a little bit more support in saying, hey, I want to take that 3.5. There's a lot of lines that have come out this week that were at 3.5 or close to it. This Patriots line right here at the 3, depending on what side you want, you might want to, just consider these 3s as lines to look at very closely and see if there's something that sticks out to you here, especially this 3.5. If I was on the Packers side, I'd be really encouraged to take that 3.5, knowing that, again, 32% of the time, that's going to win for the Packers, even if they don't outright win. So that's kind of why these are important and what you need to be looking at. Some numbers that have not been key numbers so far, 7 and 14. So there's actually only been one game that was decided by exactly 7 points, and only one game that was decided by 14 points. These are also numbers that are typically seen as key numbers, not just in the betting community and by me, some guy with a computer, but more importantly by the books and casinos and things like that. And you'll see a lot of the lines line up, and it's like a -7, -7.5. And so you see a lot of these 7s here, and even the 8, trying to kind of play off that key number and make you decide if you think that the 7 is the good or bad. What side is the right side on this key number that very likely could pop up. Same thing with the Bears. Earlier in the week, we took the Bears +7.5, knowing that we were going to get that key number and the hook. So surprisingly enough, 7 has not been a huge deciding factor. In saying that, though, it's sort of due for some regression. Obviously, nothing is promised to you, but I would say that having the 7 pop up, usually like 5 to 6% of the time, maybe even like 5 to 8% of the time in any given year is the norm. So this is due for some positive regression. I wouldn't be surprised if we get it this week, if we end up with a lot of 7s as deciding factors. The 14 as well, It's due for some regression. It is usually about the same, about 5 to 8%. So probably going to see some 14s pop up here, if not this week, pretty soon. The 6 and the 10, these are your lesser key numbers. It's usually, if you don't already know this, it's usually 3, 7 as your main key numbers, and then 6, 10, and 14 as kind of your lesser key numbers. 14 has been on the rise, though, lately. The last year or so, we've seen more and more games decided by 14 points or more. Specifically, in 2019, we had 29% of the games be decided by 14 points or more. In 2020, which was last year, we saw 35% of the games end decided by 14 points or more. Now, my theory on this was that because of COVID and because there wasn't a lot of prep time and there was a lot of changes to the rules and when you could and couldn't meet and all that kind of stuff, the good teams that were good, obviously, beat the hell out of bad teams because the bad teams just could not prepare correctly, and without that prep time, your deficiencies got exposed and you ended up being really bad and looking probably worse than you really should have been in a normal year. So we saw a lot of these blowout games, which would at least somewhat explain this 6% shift. Not that it's super huge and not that it's, unaccountable, but that's a big enough shift where it's something that caught my eye, and that's kind of how I rationale that away. The 7 to 14 point game, so something that ends between 8 and 14. In 2019, it was 25% of the games, so 1 out of 4 games were ending in like this kind of middling area, and that was about right, because even the year prior to that, going back to like 2014, that had always been about the number, about like 24 to 26%, somewhere in there. And then in 2020, we see that number shoot all the way down to 18%. Same thing, these games that previously would have been kind of, at least somewhat closer matchups or better competitions, because of the COVID rationale I was just giving you, the team that was just not as good ends up getting blown out. Instead of being like a 10-point game, it was like a 17 to 20-point game. So that's what we saw last year. And I'm saying all this because I was very curious to see how this year would turn out and kind of where these numbers are heading right now. And it surprised to me, but maybe not to you, through these first 2 weeks, we had 50% of the games in between 1 and 7 points. So 50% of the games have been one-score games. That's not overly surprising. The last 2 years, it was at 46% for the year. So usually we do have about half the games that are played end up being between 1 and 7 points. So again, not a huge surprise there, especially with the smaller sample size. 50% is not really way off. But my expectation of there being more kind of middle games has not really come to fruition yet. Now, there's still time for it to regress and to maybe come back to the mean here. But as of right now, we're still seeing 34% of games end in 14 points or more differential. So as of right now, and the way that these games are playing out and the way that the teams are looking so far, these bigger lines that sometimes can scare us off of things, like the Broncos this week, it was Broncos minus 11, probably shouldn't, only because there is still about a 1 in 3 chance that a game is going to be decided by 14 points or more. That's actually a little bit over 1 in 3. So if you see a team that you really like, that you really believe is going to be better than the other team, don't let those lines immediately scare you off. I know sometimes I see it and I'm like, man, that's a double-digit line. I'm just going to skip it for now unless there's like a really big advantage there or a really obvious edge. But in reality, at least for this year, so far, we should not be too scared off by these lines. The ones that are kind of tricky here are these middling lines. This 8 through 13, again, it's not very... as far as lines are concerned, we don't see too many. Like I just said, the Broncos are from 11, they went to 10. So it's kind of right here in this like dead zone of, very small amount of games are going to really end up in this area. It's usually like 2 to 3 games a week end up in that like 8 to 13 range. And so if you take in a line that's like I said, again, I'm just using the Broncos as an example, like a minus 10, there is only really 2 to 3 games that are going to end up like that this week, meaning that you should probably have some security in thinking that, hey, Hopefully this line does not end up on that. It should only be 2. It's kind of like that would be like an arbitrary number to land on. And so maybe that helps you out a little bit more. Maybe the fact that the 10, if you get the 10, is somewhat of a key number. You at least get the push. Also kind of helps with that number. So, again, I'm using the Broncos as an example, but really more importantly, I just want you to see where these numbers are pointing and kind of where the numbers have been landing so far. Last thing I want to go over here is just how we are comparing to years past. So this year, first game of the season, or week 1, average total points for all the games was 48 points. In 2020, it was roughly still about 48 points. It was 47.375. So if we round that up, 48, obviously, if you want to round it down, 47. Again, 47 is a key number, but the year prior to that, 2019, it was 48.5 points was the average. So all in all, let's just say 48. That's about the average points for week 1. And that's not an outlier. That's nothing new. That's been that way for at least, 6-7 years now. So just keep that in mind for next year when you see these week 1 lines getting put up and you see some totals that are like at 44, 42, 41. There is a good chance to take an over on those. You just have to be really picky. If you've noticed from my picks, I am an under better. I really prefer to have that under just because it gives you the extra out in case of injuries and things like that. And it is maybe a little bit more predictable in knowing that, hey, these 2 teams are really bad. And in order to lose this wager, I'm going to have to not only be wrong about the teams, but then there's also going to have to be some sort of special teams score or some sort of score that's just unaccounted for. And even if you get that, you still have a chance that there is some sort of injury, there is some sort of setback, there is some sort of bad penalty. So I like the unders, but again, if you are somebody who likes to play the overs and you see those short lines, remember that 48 points is the average for week 1. Now, week 2 is where we see a lot of erratic numbers here. So in 2019, it was about 38 to 39 points was the average. 2020, which was last year, we saw about 53 points on average. And then this year, we saw 48 points again on average. So this year has been like almost a perfect middle. And I think it's kind of, I think this is more indicative of what we're going to see this year. In 2020, I've already gone over it, but the NFL was very cautious with throwing flags. They told their refs, if you can, kind of swallow the whistle, do that. Don't blow too many flags. We don't want to turn fans away, especially in a year where these teams have not really had a chance to properly prepare. We don't want to keep dinging them for every little thing and slowing the game down and all that kind of stuff. So they didn't blow the flags so much, which led to increased scoring because you didn't have drives being stalled out by bad flags. If anything, you had maybe drives being helped because there were like defensive penalties, like pass interference and things like that to help move the ball down the field. And so we saw the total points average go up. Going off of 2019, which was more of like your kind of baseline, this week 2 score was a little bit higher than that. Could be that there's still some remnants of flags not being thrown, or it could just be teams are bad. Could just be that this year was a little off. 2019 was a little low. I think 2018 off the top of my head was like 41 or 42 points was the average. It was pretty low as well. So we're kind of seeing this middle between like what we used to have in previous, and I'm even going to call it like the previous era of football, compared to what we saw last year. And I think we're probably going to see that again this year. 2019 was at 47. 2020 was at 52. I could see it. It's probably going to land somewhere smack in the middle of there. Could be 47 or 51 because those are key numbers. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see another like 48, 49, somewhere in there. So as we get through this week, I'll keep updating you with kind of where these numbers are falling at, what your average point should be, your point totals. Just on average, I'm going to tell you, you're probably going to be less than what you had last year. And that's easy enough to find. You can just Google, week 5, 2020, and you'll see what all the scores came out from last year. But what it is a little bit harder to do is to go back to 2019, grab all the games for a single week, average those out, and kind of have to do all that math yourself or on your cell phone or whatever. So I'm just going to give it to you. But just, again, kind of keep in mind, 2019 was a lot of key numbers. It was like 44, 47. 2020 jumps up to like 51, 52, 53 for the most part. So a lot of these are probably going to fall right in the middle of those. So again, I'll keep you updated. Just wanted to give you this quick little update today for this week, and then we'll look forward to next week and what this week not only tells us but shows us and what we can learn from it, and then kind of how we can update our algorithms with the new info. But thanks again, guys. Have a great day.